The air in the community center was thick with the scent of lemon cleaner and stale coffee, the kind that clings to the walls after years of potlucks and prayer meetings. I stood near the back by a wobbly folding table draped in a plastic cloth, my fingers worrying the edge of a paper napkin. It was already smooth, but I kept smoothing it, as if I could press away the ache in my chest. My uncle's voice boomed across the room, slicing through the chatter like a dull knife. "Eleanor's just a housewife." He said the words dripping with a chuckle that wasn't kind. Never amounted to much, our Ellie. The laughter that followed from my cousin, her fiancé, a few aunts, felt like a gust of wind, sharp and cold, though I didn't let my face show it. I never do. I kept my eyes on the napkin, its cheap fibers rough under my fingertips. My cousin Lisa sat at a nearby table, her new engagement ring catching the fluorescent light as she tossed her head back, giggling. "Oh, Uncle Ray, you're too much," she said, but her glance flicked to me, sharp and smug, like she was measuring the distance between us and finding me wanting. The room didn't pause. No one corrected him. Why would they? To them, I was Eleanor May Carter, 47, unmarried, childless, the woman who showed up to every family event with a broccoli casserole and a smile that stayed shallow. The one who lived alone in a modest house on Maple Street, who knitted scarves for the church bazaar and spoke so little they'd stopped expecting me to. They didn't know. They couldn't. I'd made sure of that. But the truth, the secret I carried, sat heavy in my chest, a stone lodged where my breath should have been. It was always there, a shadow that followed me, a pulse I couldn't silence. I'd buried it deep, locked it away with the medals I kept hidden in a locked box, the letters I never read, the name I hadn't spoken in years. I'd chosen this life, this quiet, this invisibility, because it was safer. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt when they laughed, when their words carved into me like a blade finding old scars. I glanced up, catching my reflection in the glass door across the room. My hair, once a fiery auburn that caught the sun, was now dulled with gray, pulled into a low bun that didn't draw eyes. My dress was navy simple, the kind that fades into a crowd. But my eyes, hazel steady, too sharp for this room, gave me away. They always did. They held too much nights in places I couldn't name. Faces I couldn't unsee, choices I couldn't undo. I looked away quickly before anyone noticed, before I betrayed myself. The gathering was for my nephew Ethan's high school graduation, a milestone that had drawn our scattered family to this small Ohio town. The community center was packed with relatives I saw once a year, if that, their voices overlapping in a familiar hum. My sister Diane was near the dessert table, fussing over a lopsided cake, her voice high and frayed as she snapped at her husband Tom to fix the balloons. "They're drooping, Tom, can't you see?" she said, not looking at me, not looking at anyone but the cake. Tom nodded, distracted, his phone glowing in his hand. They didn't look at me. They hadn't, not really, since I'd come back to this town, since I'd settled into this life and let them assume what they wanted. "Eleanor, can you grab more napkins?" Diane called, her tone sharp, like I was a hired hand instead of her sister. She didn't look up, didn't wait for an answer. I nodded, though she wouldn't see, and moved toward the supply closet. My steps, soft, measured the way I'd been taught to move in places far darker than this fluorescent-lit hall. My flats whispered against the linoleum, and I kept my shoulders straight, my face calm, even as Uncle Ray's words echoed in my head. Just a housewife, if he only knew. The closet was cramped, dim, smelling of dust and bleach. Shelves sagged under boxes of paper plates, plastic cups, and cleaning supplies. I reached for a pack of napkins, my fingers brushing the plastic wrap, when the door creaked behind me. It was Lisa's fiancé, Mark, leaning against the frame, his tie loosened, a beer bottle dangling from his hand. "You don't have to let him talk like that." "You know," he said, his voice low, almost gentle, like he was offering me a lifeline I didn't deserve. I froze, the napkins heavy in my hands, my pulse quickening. "It's fine," I said, my voice steady, though my throat tightened. "I don't mind." He tilted his head, studying me like I was a curiosity, a puzzle he didn't care enough to solve. "You're too quiet, Eleanor. People walk all over you because you let them." He smiled, a lopsided thing that thought it was kind, then pushed off the door frame and left the door swinging shut behind him. I stood there alone in the closet, the napkin still in my hands, the air too close, too quiet, The words stung not because they were true, but because they were so far from it. Quiet wasn't weakness. Quiet was survival. Quiet was the discipline that had kept me alive in places where a single sound could have ended me. I closed my eyes just for a moment, and the memory came unbidden, a desert night. The air so dry it burned my lungs, the weight of a rifle in my hands, the crackle of a voice in my earpiece. Viper, move, now. I pushed it down, locked it away, and opened my eyes. The closet was still there, unchanged, and so was I. Back in the main room, the party churned on. Ethan was at the center, grinning, his cap and gown slung over a chair as his friends crowded around, their laughter bright and careless. I watched from the edge of the crowd, my heart swelling despite the ache. He was a good kid, kind with a spark that reminded me of someone I used to know, someone I used to be. I'd slipped a card into his gift pile earlier, a simple note with a check inside signed only with my name. No rank, no title, just Eleanor. It was enough. It had to be. I started clearing plates, my movements automatic, blending into the background. Uncle Ray's laugh boomed again, this time about some old family story, but it still grated, each chuckle a reminder of his earlier words. I caught Diane's eye as I stacked dishes, and for a moment I thought she might say something, maybe ask how I was, maybe see me. But she just gave a tight nod, her attention already elsewhere, and turned away. I slipped out to the parking lot before the goodbyes began, needing the air, needing the quiet. The night was cool, the sky a deep indigo streaked with clouds that hid the stars. I leaned against my car, a gray sedan that drew no attention, and let out a breath I'd been holding all evening. The stone in my chest shifted, not lighter but familiar. I could carry it, I always had, but standing there alone, the memories pressed closer. A flash of heat, the smell of cordite, the weight of a decision no one should have to make. A name they'd called me, one I hadn't heard in decades. A life I'd walked away from but never fully left. I closed my eyes, my fingers curling against the cold metal of the car, and pushed it all down again. Not here, not now. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the hum of the engine my only company. My house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickering like it always did. Inside, I set my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the quiet of my living room. A single photo sat on the mantel, tucked between a vase and a stack of books, a younger me smiling, standing between two figures whose faces were blurred by time and memory. I didn't look at it often, it hurt too much. But tonight I crossed the room, my bare feet soft on the rug, and touched the frame just for a moment. The woman in that photo wasn't a housewife. She wasn't a nobody. She was someone else, someone I'd buried but could never forget. I turned away, my throat tight, and moved to the window, looking out at the street. The neighborhood was still, the houses dark, the world asleep. But I wasn't. I never really was. The weight of who I'd been, who I still was, lived in my bones, in the way I stood, in the way I breathed. And though I'd chosen this life, though I'd let them think what they wanted, I knew the truth. One day they might too. If you're listening, if you're still here with me, I hope you'll stay. There's more to this story, more than they ever saw, more than I ever let show. Hit that subscribe button, come along with me, and let's uncover it together. Because the quiet ones, the ones they overlook, they're the ones with stories that shake the world. The morning after Ethan's party, I woke before dawn, the house still cloaked in shadow. My bedroom was small, the kind of room that holds just enough a bed with a faded quilt, a nightstand with a lamp, a window that faced the neighbor's sycamore. I lay there, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the silence. It wasn't peaceful, not really. It was the kind of quiet that hums with memory, with things you've tried to forget, but can't. I didn't want to get up, but I did, my bare feet cold against the hardwood as I moved to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the air with a bitter warmth, and I stood by the counter waiting, my hands wrapped around a mug before it was even full. I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for years. Not since the nights when sleep was a luxury, when closing my eyes meant trusting someone else to keep watch. I don't talk about those nights, don't let myself linger on them, but they creep in anyway, like smoke under a door. That morning as the coffee brewed, I saw it again, a room with concrete walls lit by a single bulb that flickered when the generator stuttered. I was 26, my hair cropped short, my hands steady as I cleaned a rifle, the metal cool under my fingers. The air smelled of dust and sweat, and somewhere outside, a radio crackled with static relaying coordinates I'd memorized by heart. "Viper, you're up," the voice had said, low and urgent. I'd nodded, though no one could see, and stood my boots silent on the floor. I blinked and the memory dissolved. The kitchen was back, the coffee maker hissing its finish. I poured a cup, the steam curling against my face, and sat at the table, the mug warm in my hands. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time I didn't want to face. Today was just another day. Groceries, laundry, maybe a walk to the library, but the weight in my chest was heavier than usual, stirred up by Uncle Ray's words, by Lisa's laugh, by the way they'd all looked through me. I sipped the coffee, bitter and too hot, and let the burn ground me. I was here, not there, not anymore, but there never really leaves you. I learned that early in the years when I was someone else, someone they called Viper, though I hated the name at first. It felt too sharp, too cold, but it stuck the way code names do when they fit better than your own. I was good at what I did too, good maybe. The training had been brutal, not just the physical part though, that was bad enough. Endless runs through mud obstacle courses that left your hands bleeding, drills where you learned to hold your breath until your lungs screamed. But the real test was the mind, the hours in windowless rooms memorizing codes, learning to read a stranger's face for lies, mastering the art of disappearing even when you were standing right there. I'd been young, hungry, driven by something I didn't fully understand, maybe a need to prove I was more than the girl from a small Ohio town, more than my sister's shadow. I stood moving to the sink to rinse my mug, my movements automatic. The water was cold, stinging my fingers, and I stared out the window at the backyard where the grass was patchy, and the rose bush I'd planted years ago was barely hanging on. I didn't garden much anymore, didn't have the patience for it, but I used to back when I thought I could build something normal, something that didn't smell of gun oil or taste of fear. Another memory came unbidden, sharper than the last. A night in a place I still can't name, not even in my head. The sky was black, no stars, just the faint glow of a distant city. I was crouched behind a crumbling wall, my breath shallow, my pulse steady despite the chaos. The team was small. 4 of us, faces I can't let myself picture anymore. We'd been sent to retrieve something, a package, though we didn't ask what it was. We never did. My job was to lead, to get us in and out, to make the calls no one else wanted to. I'd done it before too many times, but that night was different. The air felt wrong, too still, and when the shooting started, it was over before I could blink. I made a choice, left someone behind to save the rest. It was the right call, the only call, but it cost me. It cost us all. I turned off the faucet, my hands dripping, and dried them on a dish towel, the fabric rough against my skin. My reflection in the window caught me off guard. Older, softer, but still the same eyes, the ones that had seen too much. I looked away, moving to the living room where the photo on the mantel waited. I didn't touch it this time, just stood there letting its presence pull me back. The woman in that photo, standing between 2 blurred figures, wasn't smiling for joy. She was smiling because she had to, because the camera demanded it, because the world didn't know what she'd just done. I'd been gone for years back then, long stretches where my family thought I was finding myself or working overseas. I let them believe it, sent vague postcards from cities I'd never seen, called on holidays with stories I made up. Diane would ask questions, her voice sharp with suspicion, but I'd laugh, change the subject, promise to visit soon. I never did, not until I had to. Not until the life I'd built or been given crumbled, and I came back to this town, to this house, to this version of me. The phone rang, jarring me. I let it go to voicemail, knowing it was probably Diane checking if I'd bring something to the next family dinner. She didn't need me there, not really, but she liked the idea of me showing up, playing the role of the dutiful sister. I didn't mind most days. It was easier than explaining why I flinched at loud noises, why I never sat with my back to a door, why I woke up some nights with my heart racing, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. I moved to the bedroom, pulling on a sweater and jeans, the kind of clothes that didn't stand out. The mirror above the dresser showed a woman who looked like she belonged here, but I knew better. I opened the closet, reaching past the coats to a small safe tucked in the corner. I didn't open it often, couldn't bear to. But today, I spun the dial the clicks loud in the quiet room. Inside was a box plain metal locked with a key I kept on a chain around my neck. I didn't open it, just held it, the weight familiar grounding. Inside were the medals, the letters, the proof of who I'd been. I didn't need to see them to know they were there. Another memory. A briefing room sterile, the air heavy with tension. I was 30, maybe 31, standing at a table with maps and photos spread out like a puzzle. The man across from me, his uniform crisp. His eyes hard, was giving orders I didn't like but couldn't refuse. "Viper, this one's on you." He'd set his voice flat. "No mistakes." I'd nodded, my jaw tight, knowing what it meant. Knowing I'd come back changed if I came back at all. I did, but not whole. No one ever does. I locked the safe, tucked the box away, and closed the closet door. The house was too quiet now, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I grabbed my keys, needing to move, needing air. The grocery store was a safe bet, a place where I could blend in, where no one would ask questions. I drove the short distance, the radio off the town, waking up around me, kids on bikes, a jogger with earbuds, the diner's neon sign flickering to life. Inside the store, I pushed a cart down the aisles, picking up milk bread, a bag of apples. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact. But at the checkout, the cashier, a girl barely out of high school, smiled too brightly. "You're Ethan's aunt, right?" she said, scanning my items. "Saw you at the party last night." "Cute kid." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, he's a good one." She kept talking something about Ethan's college plans, but I barely heard her. My eyes caught a magazine on the rack, a headline about a military operation, a photo of soldiers in desert camo. My throat tightened and I looked away, handing her my card. She didn't notice, just kept chatting, but I felt it, the pull of that other life, the one I'd left but couldn't escape. Back home, I unpacked the groceries, my hands moving on autopilot. The day stretched ahead, empty but heavy. I thought about calling Ethan, congratulating him again, but I didn't. He didn't need me hovering. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee cold now, and let myself remember one more time. A moment, not a mission, but a quiet one. A sunrise over a base I'd never see again. The sky streaked with pink and gold, a rare moment of peace. I'd stood there alone, my uniform dusty, my hands empty, and promised myself I'd survive. I had, but surviving isn't the same as living. I stood, shaking it off, and moved to the sink, washing the mug again, though it was already clean. The weight in my chest was still there, but I could carry it. I always did. And though I'd buried that life, though I'd let them think I was just Eleanor, I knew who I was. One day they might too. But for now, I was here in this house, in this town, holding my secrets close, waiting for a reason to let them go. The days after Ethan's party blurred into the familiar rhythm of my life, each one folding into the next, like pages in a book no one bothered to read. I woke early, made coffee, and moved through my routines, watering the rosebush, sorting laundry, walking to the library with a bag of books to return. The town was small, the kind where everyone knows your name but not your story, and I liked it that way. I kept my head down, my smiles, brief, my words few, but the ache from that night, from Uncle Ray's laugh and Lisa's smug glance, lingered like a bruise tender when I pressed against it. I was in the grocery store a week later, reaching for a can of soup when I heard it. A voice behind me, sharp and familiar. "Eleanor, is that you?" It was Mrs. Hargrove, the pastor's wife, her cart piled with baking supplies. She was in her 60s, her hair a perfect silver bob, her smile too wide for the cramped aisle. "You're looking well," she said, though her eyes flicked over my plain sweater and jeans like she was searching for something to compliment. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft, my hand tightening on the can. I knew what came next. It always did. "You should come to the women's group," she said, tilting her head. "We'd love to have you. It's just us girls, sharing stories, supporting each other." She paused, her smile turning pitying. "Must get lonely living all by yourself like that. No husband, no kids to keep you busy." I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected over years. "I'll think about it," I said, though I wouldn't. I never did. She nodded, satisfied, and pushed her cart past me. her heels clicking on the linoleum. I stood there, the soup can cold in my hand, my chest tight. Lonely. The word stung not because it was true, but because it was what they all saw: a spinster. A woman who'd missed her chance, a nobody drifting through life. They didn't know the nights I'd spent in places where loneliness was the least of my worries, where the only company was the hum of a radio and the weight of a mission I couldn't fail. I paid for my groceries and walked home, the plastic bags cutting into my palms. The street was quiet, the leaves skittering across the sidewalk in a late summer breeze. At the corner, I passed a group of younger women, Lisa's friends maybe, or girls I'd seen at the party. They were laughing, their voices bright, their hair catching the sun. One of them glanced at me, her eyes sliding over me like I was part of the scenery, and I felt it again, that invisible wall between me and the world. They were proud, these girls, their lives laid out like open books, their futures shiny with promise. I didn't envy them, not exactly, but I envied the ease of it, the way they didn't have to hide. At home, I unpacked the groceries, my movements slow, deliberate. The kitchen was small, the counters worn but clean, the kind of place that felt like it belonged to someone else. I'd lived here for years, but it never felt like mine, not really. It was a borrowed life, a disguise I'd slipped into when I came back to this town. I opened a drawer, pulling out a knife to chop an onion for dinner, and my hand stilled. The blade was dull, nothing like the ones I'd once carried, but the weight of it brought a flash, a memory of another knife, another night. My hand steady as I cut through a rope, freeing someone who'd never know my name. I blinked, pushing it down, and started chopping, the onion's sting burning my eyes. Diane called that evening, her voice crackling through the phone. "Eleanor, you free Sunday?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. "We're having a family dinner, just a small thing. Can you bring that salad you make, the one with the pecans?" Her tone was brisk, like she was checking off a list. I said yes because I always did, and she hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, the silence louder than her voice. She didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the party, didn't mention Uncle Ray's words. Why would she? To her, I was just Eleanor, the sister who showed up when needed, who didn't make waves. Sunday came and I stood in Diane's kitchen, tossing greens and pecans in a bowl, the chatter of the family spilling in from the dining room. The house was warm, cluttered with photos and knickknacks, the kind of place that screamed family. I didn't belong here, not really, but I played the part, my hands moving on autopilot. Lisa was there, her ring flashing as she helped set the table, her laughter sharp and frequent. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to me, but I felt her presence, her confidence filling the room like perfume. She was the star tonight, the engaged girl with a wedding to plan, a life to flaunt. I was the backdrop, the one who faded into the woodwork. Dinner was loud, the table crowded with plates and voices. Uncle Ray was at the head, his stories dominating, his laugh booming. I sat near the end next to Ethan, who gave me a small smile before turning back to his phone. I picked at my food, listening as the conversation swirled around me. Lisa's wedding plans, Tom's new job, Diane's complaints about the neighbors. No one asked me anything and I didn't offer. But then Lisa's voice cut through, bright and pointed. "Eleanor, you're so quiet," she said, her smile too sweet. "Don't you ever get bored just doing nothing all day?" The table went still just for a moment, Forks, pausing, eyes flicking to me. I met her gaze, my face calm, though my pulse quickened. "I keep busy," I said, my voice even, my hands steady in my lap. She raised an eyebrow like she'd expected more, but Uncle Ray chuckled, breaking the tension. "Ellie's always been like that," he said, waving a hand. "Never had much to say, have you, girl?" I didn't answer, just looked down at my plate, my fingers curling against my napkin. The room moved on, the chatter picking up, but the words stayed with me, sharp as glass. Doing nothing, never had much to say. If they only knew. If they could have seen me at 28, crouched in a safe house, my hands stained with dirt, my eyes scanning a map while a team waited for my orders. If they could have heard the voices in my ear, calling me Viper, trusting me to lead them through hell. But they couldn't. I'd made sure of it. I helped clear the table after dinner, my movements automatic, blending into the background. Diane was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, her back to me. I wanted to say something to bridge the gap between us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stacked plates, wiped counters, and slipped out before the coffee was served. The night air was cool, the stars hidden by clouds, and I walked home, my steps slow, the salad bowl heavy in my arms. At home, I stood in the living room, the silence pressing against me. The photo on the mantel caught my eye, and I crossed to it, my fingers brushing the frame. The woman in that photo wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she'd said too much, seen too much, done too much. I'd buried her, but she was still there in the way I moved, in the way I breathed. I turned away, my throat tight, and moved to the couch, sinking into it, my hands empty. The next day, I volunteered at the church sorting donations for the food pantry. The basement was cold, the air smelling of cardboard and dust. Mrs. Hargrove was there, her voice bright as she directed the others. Younger women, mothers' girls, who laughed easily and didn't look at me. I worked quietly, stacking cans, folding clothes, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. One of the girls, maybe 20, dropped a box of cereal, and I bent to pick it up, handing it to her. She smiled, quick and dismissive, and turned away, her laughter joining the others. I stood there, the can still in my hand, invisible. But I wasn't invisible, not always. There'd been a time when eyes followed me, when my presence shifted a room, when my voice carried weight. I remembered a moment years ago in a place I can't name, a briefing room, the air thick with tension, men and women in uniforms watching me as I spoke my words, sharp, precise, final. I'd been Viper then, not Eleanor, and they'd listened, not because I was loud, but because I was sure. I'd walked away from that life, but it hadn't walked away from me. I left the church early, the sky gray, the air heavy with the promise of rain. At home, I stood in the kitchen, the salad bowl still on the counter, unwashed. I didn't move to clean it. Didn't move at all, just stood there, the weight in my chest heavier than ever. They saw a nobody, a woman who didn't matter. But I wasn't that woman, not really. I was something else, something they'd never understand. And though I carried that truth in silence, though I let them think what they wanted, I knew who I was. One day they might too. The invitation came on a Tuesday, tucked in with the usual bills and junk mail, its cream envelope stark against the clutter. I stood at the kitchen counter, my hands still damp from washing dishes, and stared at it. The return address was Official Department of Defense, Washington, D.C., and my name, Eleanor May Carter, was typed in crisp black ink. No mistakes, no flourishes. My pulse quickened, a reflex I couldn't stop, and I set the envelope down unopened like it might burn me. I didn't need to read it to know what it was. I'd been expecting it, dreading it for weeks. The town was hosting a Veterans Memorial Ceremony, a big one, the kind that drew crowds and news vans. They'd been planning it for months, ever since the mayor decided to dedicate a new monument in the park. I'd seen the flyers at the library, heard the chatter at the diner, but I'd kept my distance, nodding politely when people mentioned it, changing the subject when they pressed. I didn't go to things like that, not anymore. Too many eyes, too many questions, too many memories I couldn't afford to stir. But the envelope told me what I'd feared. They wanted me there. Not Eleanor, the quiet woman from Maple Street, but the other me, the one I'd buried. I left the envelope on the counter and moved to the living room, needing distance. The house was quiet, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds, casting stripes on the floor. I sat on the couch, my hands folded in my lap, and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. I didn't want to go. I couldn't. The thought of standing in that park surrounded by uniforms and speeches made my skin prickle, like I was stepping back into a life I'd fought to leave. But the invitation wasn't a request. It was a summons, and I knew better than to ignore it. I stood restless and crossed to the mantel where the photo waited. My younger self stared back, her smile tight, her eyes too old for her face. I touched the frame just for a moment, and the memory came sharp and unbidden. A hangar at dawn, the air cold, the hum of a plane being prepped in the distance. I'd been 32, my duffel at my feet, my orders in hand. "Viper, you're needed?" The colonel had said, his voice low, his eyes not meeting mine. I'd nodded because that's what I did, and walked away from everything I'd known. I blinked, and the living room was back, the photos still there, the weight in my chest heavier than ever. Diane called that evening, her voice bright through the phone. "Eleanor, you going to that memorial thing?" she asked, like it was a casual question, like she hadn't seen the tension in me at the mention of anything military. "Ethan's in the color guard, you know. He's nervous, poor kid. You should come show some family support." I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the receiver. I don't know. I said, my voice careful. It's not really my thing. She sighed, the sound sharp with impatience. It's just a ceremony, Eleanor. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. Everyone's going. Lisa's helping with the programs and Uncle Ray's giving a speech about his time in Vietnam. You'd look out of place if you didn't show. I closed my eyes, the weight pressing harder. I'll think about it. I said, though I already knew I had no choice. The envelope on the counter made sure of that. Diane didn't push, just said something about bringing cookies for the reception after, and hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, the silence loud around me. The next day I went to the library, needing the distraction. The air smelled of old paper and dust, and I moved through the stacks, my fingers trailing over book spines. Mrs. Hargrove was there, sorting returns, her smile bright as she waved me over. Eleanor, you're coming to the memorial, aren't you? She said, her voice carrying. It's going to be beautiful. We're honoring all our veterans, and they're bringing in some big names from D.C. You wouldn't want to miss it. I nodded, my throat tight, and mumbled something about maybe showing up. She didn't notice the strain in my voice, just kept talking about the guest list, the music, the new monument. I slipped away, a book in hand, and checked out quickly, needing air. Outside, the sky was gray, the breeze cool, and I walked home, the book heavy in my bag, my thoughts heavier. At home, I finally opened the envelope. The letter was formal, typed on heavy stationery, the seal at the top unmistakable. It was an invitation, but not the kind you could decline. Ms. Eleanor May Carter, you are respectfully requested to attend the Veterans Memorial Dedication Ceremony. The words blurred as I read, my eyes catching on phrases like honored guest and in recognition of your service. There was no mention of Viper, no hint of what I'd done, but they knew. They always did. At the bottom, a handwritten note in sharp, precise script we've never forgotten. Please come. It was signed by a name I recognized, a general I'd met once years ago in a room I'd rather forget. I folded the letter, my hands trembling, and tucked it back into the envelope. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and I moved to the kitchen, needing something to do. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and stood there watching the flame, trying to steady myself. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to face them, the uniforms, the salutes, the weight of a past I'd buried. But I couldn't say no. Not to this. Not when they'd found me after all these years. The ceremony was in 3 days, and I spent them avoiding it, filling my hours with small tasks. I cleaned the house, scrubbed the kitchen floor until my knees ached, mowed the lawn until the air smelled of cut grass. But the envelope stayed on the counter, a silent demand, and every time I passed it, my heart stuttered. I tried on dresses from my closet, rejecting each one too bright, too formal, too much. I settled on a navy suit, tailored but plain, the kind that didn't draw eyes. It was close to what I'd worn back then, in rooms where I'd been Viper, not Eleanor, and the familiarity was both comfort and curse. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the darkness heavy, the house creaking around me. Memories came sharper than usual. A desert road, the air thick with dust, my hand steady on a radio as I called in coordinates. Viper confirmed, the voice had said, and I had knowing what it meant, knowing the cost. I'd made choices that night, choices that saved lives but broke something in me. I sat up, my breath ragged, and moved to the closet, opening the safe, pulling out the metal box. I didn't open it, just held it, the chain around my neck cold against my skin. The metals inside were heavy, but the weight of what they meant was heavier. Morning came, and I dressed slowly, my hands steady despite the churn in my stomach. The suit fit perfectly, the mirror, showing a woman who looked composed, unremarkable. But my eyes betrayed me, as always, too sharp, too haunted. I pinned my hair back, slipped on low heels, and grabbed the invitation, tucking it into my purse. The walk to the park was short, the town waking up around me, flags already flying, banners strung across Main Street. The park was crowded when I arrived, the grass lined with chairs, a podium set up near the new monument, a stone slab etched with names I didn't want to read. I found a seat near the back, my purse in my lap, my posture straight. Diane was there, fussing over Ethan, who looked nervous in his color guard uniform. Lisa was handing out programs, her smile bright, her voice carrying. Uncle Ray was near the front practicing his speech, his chest puffed with pride. They didn't see me, didn't look my way, and I was glad. I wanted to blend in, to be invisible, but the invitation in my purse burned a reminder that I couldn't. The crowd grew, the air buzzing with anticipation. Veterans in old uniforms mingled with families, kids running through the grass, reporters setting up cameras. I kept my eyes down, my hands folded, but I felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of what was coming. A man in a suit sat a few rows ahead, his posture too rigid, his glance too sharp. I knew his type, had worked with men like him, and my pulse quickened. They were here, the ones who knew, and they were watching. The ceremony was about to start, the band tuning up, the mayor stepping to the podium. I sat there, my breath shallow, my hands tight in my lap, and told myself I could do this. I could sit through it, clap when expected, slip away when it was over. But the letter, the general's note, the weight in my chest, they told me otherwise. This wasn't just a ceremony. This was something else, something I couldn't escape. And as the first notes of the national anthem played, I felt it, the past rushing toward me, unstoppable like a wave I couldn't outrun. The national anthem faded, its final notes swallowed by the rustle of the crowd, settling into their seats. The park was alive with sound-murmured conversations, the snap of flags in the breeze, the distant laughter of children chasing each other through the grass. I sat near the back, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the navy suit stiff against my skin. The invitation in my purse felt like a live wire, its presence humming, pulling my focus, despite my efforts to stay grounded. I kept my eyes on the podium where the mayor was adjusting his notes, his smile broad and practiced. But my attention drifted, scanning the crowd, a habit I couldn't break. Faces blurred together. Locals, veterans, reporters, but a few stood out, the man in the suit, a few rows ahead, his posture too sharp. A woman near the front, her sunglasses hiding eyes I knew were watching. They were here, the ones who knew, and their presence made the air feel thinner. The mayor began his speech, his voice booming through the speakers, full of words like honor and sacrifice. I tried to listen, to focus on the cadence of his words, but my mind was elsewhere, caught in the weight of why I was here. The letter had been clear: honored guest, in recognition of your service, but it hadn't said what they wanted, what they expected. I'd spent years fading into the background, building a life where no one asked questions, where no one looked too closely. Now I was exposed, summoned to a stage I'd never wanted to step back onto. My fingers tightened, the knuckles white, and I forced myself to breathe slow and steady, the way I'd been trained. The crowd clapped as the mayor stepped down, and a local veteran took the podium, his voice rough with age, as he shared a story from Vietnam. Uncle Ray was next. I knew his speech about his own service, polished from years of retelling. I glanced at him, seated near the front, his chest puffed, his hands clasped like he was already practicing. Diane was a few seats away, fussing with Ethan's uniform, her whispers sharp and anxious. Lisa stood off to the side, handing out the last of the programs, her smile bright, her movements confident. They were in their element, surrounded by people who saw them, who cared what they had to say. I was the outlier, the one who didn't fit, and I felt it more acutely now, with the weight of the invitation pressing against me. The veteran finished, and Uncle Ray stood, his steps heavy as he approached the podium. His voice carried the same bravado I'd heard at Ethan's party, the kind that filled a room and left no space for anyone else. "Folks, it's an honor to be here." He began, his grin wide. "When I was in Nam, we didn't have ceremonies like this, but we knew what it meant to serve." He launched into his story, one I'd heard a dozen times: his unit, his buddies, the jungle, the firefights. The crowd listened, nodding, some veterans exchanging glances, others wiping their eyes. I sat still, my face composed, but inside I was unraveling. Not because of his story, but because of mine, the one I couldn't tell, the one that clawed at me, now demanding to be remembered. I shifted in my seat, my eyes drifting to the monument, its stone gleaming in the morning light. The names etched there were strangers to me, but they carried the same weight, the same cost. I'd known names like that, faces like that, in places I couldn't name aloud. A memory flickered, a safe house, the air thick with smoke, a young man's voice breaking as he whispered, "Viper, don't leave me." I'd made the call, the one that saved the mission, but not him. I blinked hard, pushing it down my hands, trembling in my lap. Not here, not now. Uncle Ray finished the crowd clapping, and I joined in, my hands mechanical, my heart racing. The program moved on, a choir, a prayer, a moment of silence that felt too loud in my head. I wanted to leave, to slip away before anyone noticed, but the letter, the general's note, kept me rooted. "We've never forgotten." The words echoed, a tether I couldn't break. I scanned the crowd again, my eyes catching on the man in the suit. He was watching the podium now, but his posture was alert, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. The mayor returned, his voice bright as he introduced the next speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome a distinguished guest, someone who served our nation at the highest levels. Please join me in honoring General Thomas R. Caldwell, United States Air Force." The name hit me like a shockwave. Caldwell. I knew him not well, but enough. A briefing room years ago, his voice sharp as he laid out a mission I hadn't wanted but couldn't refuse. "Viper, this is your op." He'd said, his eyes steady, his trust absolute. I hadn't seen him since, hadn't thought of him in years, but his name was a key unlocking memories I'd bolted shut. My breath caught, and I gripped the edge of my chair, my nails digging into the wood. The crowd turned, a ripple of movement, as all eyes shifted to the back of the park. I followed their gaze, my heart pounding, and there he was. General Caldwell, older now, his hair silver, his uniform immaculate, stepped onto the grass, his stride deliberate, his presence commanding. The air changed the way it does when someone enters a room, and everyone feels it, even if they don't know why. He was flanked by two aides, their suits crisp, their faces unreadable, and behind them a small group of men and women in uniforms, their medals glinting in the sun. The crowd hushed the chatter, dying the weight of his arrival settling over us like a storm cloud. He moved toward the podium, but he didn't climb the steps. Instead, he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching. My stomach twisted, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I knew that look, had seen it before in rooms where lives hung in the balance. He wasn't here for the ceremony, not entirely. He was here for something else. Someone else. The mayor faltered, his smile flickering as Caldwell raised a hand, silencing him without a word. The general's gaze swept the crowd, slow, deliberate, and then it stopped. On me. His eyes locked with mine, and the world narrowed, the noise fading, the crowd blurring. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, my body frozen under the weight of his stare. He nodded just once, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, but to me it was deafening. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the park, clear and steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. "We've been looking for you." The words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd turned heads, swiveling eyes, searching, landing on me. Diane froze, her hand on Ethan's shoulder, her mouth open. Lisa stopped mid-step, a program fluttering from her hand. Uncle Ray, still near the podium, frowned, his brow creasing as he followed Caldwell's gaze. The man in the suit stood, his posture shifting, and the woman with sunglasses turned, her lips parting. I felt their stares, hundreds of them, pinning me in place, but I couldn't look away from Caldwell. His eyes held mine, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something else. Respect, recognition, a weight I hadn't felt in years. My mouth went dry, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to stand, to run, to disappear, but my training held me fast, my body locked in place. I shook my head just slightly, a plea he wouldn't hear. Not here. Not now. But he didn't waver, his expression unwavering, his purpose clear. The aides stepped forward, their movements precise, and the crowd parted, a path forming from Caldwell to me. He started walking, his boots soft on the grass, his medals catching the light, and with every step, the past rushed closer, unstoppable. I saw it then in flashes, a desert night, my hands bloody, a voice in my ear. "Viper, hold the line." A room where I'd stood, my voice steady, as I gave orders that changed everything. A choice I'd made, a sacrifice I'd carried, a name I'd buried. It was all here in this park, in this moment, and I couldn't outrun it. Caldwell stopped a few feet away, his presence towering, his eyes still on mine. The crowd was silent, breathless, waiting. Diane whispered something, her voice lost in the tension. Lisa stared, her confidence gone, her eyes wide. Uncle Ray's mouth worked, but no sound came. Miss Carter Caldwell said, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "It's time." My heart stopped, then surged a flood of fear and resolve crashing through me. I stood, my legs unsteady, my purse falling to the chair. The suit felt too tight, the air too thin, but I held his gaze, my chin lifting, my shoulders squaring. I didn't want this, didn't ask for it, but it was here and I wouldn't flinch. Not now, not ever. The crowd watched, the world holding its breath, and I took a step forward into the light, into the truth I'd hidden for so long. The air in the park seemed to thicken as I stood, General Caldwell's words still ringing in my ears. "It's time." My legs felt unsteady, but I forced them to hold, my body responding to years of discipline, even as my heart raced. The crowd's eyes bore into me, a sea of faces frozen in confusion, curiosity, and something sharper, disbelief. Diane's hand was still on Ethan's shoulder, her mouth slightly open, her brow furrowed like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit. Lisa stood motionless, a program crumpled in her hand, her earlier confidence replaced by a wide-eyed stare. Uncle Ray, near the podium, leaned forward, his frown deepening, his hands gripping the back of a chair. I felt their gazes heavy as stone, but I kept my eyes on Caldwell, his presence an anchor in the storm of this moment. He stood a few feet away, his uniform crisp, his medals glinting in the morning sun. His face was older than I remembered, lines etched deeper, but his eyes were the same, steady, unyielding, the kind that saw through you and still chose to trust. I wanted to look away, to shrink back into the anonymity I'd built, but I couldn't. Not now. Not when he'd called me out. Not when the past was here, laid bare in the silence of this park. "Ms. Eleanor May Carter," he said, his voice clear, carrying over the crowd with a weight that silenced even the rustle of the breeze. "Or as some of us knew you." He paused, his gaze softening, a flicker of something personal passing between us. "Viper." The word hit like a shockwave, rippling through the crowd, drawing gasps and murmurs. My breath caught, my chest tightening, as the name I'd buried for decades was spoken aloud here, in this small Ohio town, in front of everyone I'd let think I was nothing. Viper. It wasn't just a code name. It was a life, a choice, a shadow I'd carried in my spine. I shook my head just slightly, a reflex, a plea to keep it buried, but Caldwell's expression didn't waver. He stepped closer, his boots soft on the grass, and the aides behind him stood straighter, their faces unreadable, but their presence a silent confirmation of his words. I heard Diane whisper Viper, her voice sharp with disbelief, and Lisa let out a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Ray's frown turned to a scowl, his head shaking like he could deny it with sheer will. The crowd shifted, some leaning forward, others turning to their neighbors, their murmurs growing louder, a hum of confusion and awe. I wanted to run, to disappear, but my training held me fast, my posture rigid, my hands clasped tightly at my waist to hide their trembling. Caldwell raised a hand and the crowd hushed, the weight of his authority absolute. "Miss Carter," he continued, his voice softer now, but no less commanding, "served this nation with a courage and sacrifice few can comprehend. As a covert operative under the codename Viper, she led missions that shaped history, missions that remain classified to this day. She saved lives, protected our country, and paid a price most of us will never understand." The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. I felt the crowd's eyes shift, their confusion turning to something else, shock, respect, maybe even fear. I didn't want. It didn't want their awe or their pity, but I couldn't stop it. Caldwell's gaze held mine and I saw it. Then the reason he was here, the reason he'd come. It wasn't just to honor me. It was to set the record straight, to pull me from the shadows I'd chosen and give me back the name I'd left behind. I shook my head again, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, General, don't." It was too quiet for the crowd to hear, but he saw it, the plea in my eyes. He nodded just once, a gesture of understanding, but he didn't stop. "You don't owe us your story." he said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised me. "But we owe you our gratitude. For the missions you led, the lives you saved, the sacrifices you made?" He paused, his eyes flicking to the crowd, then back to me. "You were one of the best, Viper, and we've never forgotten." The crowd was silent now, the air so still I could hear my own heartbeat. A memory flashed, unbidden, sharp as a blade, a night in a place I can't name, my hands bloody, my voice steady, as I gave the order to retreat. "Viper, we can't leave him," a voice had pleaded, young, desperate. I'd made the call, the one that saved the team but left a piece of me behind. It was my greatest sacrifice, the one that broke me, the one I'd carried in silence all these years. I blinked, pushing it down, but my eyes stung, and I knew Caldwell saw, it knew he understood. He turned to one of his aides, who stepped forward holding a small velvet box. The crowd leaned in, their breath held as Caldwell took it, his movements deliberate. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he said, opening the box to reveal a medal, its ribbon catching the light. "I present you with this distinguished service citation for acts of valor and sacrifice above and beyond the call of duty." My throat closed, my hands shaking as I reached out. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The box was heavy, the metal cold against my fingers, and I held it like it might shatter. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound crashing over me, but I barely heard it. My eyes were on Caldwell, on the box, on the weight of what it meant. I didn't want this. Didn't want the attention, but I couldn't deny it. Not now. Not here. I tried to speak, to say something, "Thank you. I don't deserve this." But my voice failed, my lips trembling. Caldwell stepped closer, his voice low, just for me. "You don't have to say anything, Eleanor. Just know we see you. We always have." I nodded, my eyes burning, and stepped back, clutching the box to my chest. The crowd was still clapping, some standing now, their faces a blur of awe and disbelief. Diane was on her feet, her hands clasped, her eyes wide with something I couldn't name, shock maybe, or guilt. Lisa stared, her program forgotten, on the ground, her mouth open like she was seeing me for the first time. Uncle Ray was still seated, his scowl gone, replaced by a look I'd never seen, confusion, maybe even shame. The man in the suit was clapping, his face unreadable, and the woman with sunglasses had removed them, her eyes soft with something like pride. Another memory came, sharper, more vivid, a room after that mission, my hands shaking as I wrote the report, my voice steady as I lied to protect the team. "Viper, you did what you had to." The officer had said, but it didn't help. I'd lost someone that night, someone who trusted me, and no medal could change that. I blinked, the part coming back, the applause fading as Caldwell stepped to the podium, his voice resuming the ceremony. I sat, the box in my lap, my hands tight around it, my face composed despite the storm inside. The crowd settled, their eyes still darting to me, but I kept my gaze forward, my posture rigid. Caldwell spoke of other veterans, other sacrifices, but I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, caught in the weight of what had just happened. They knew now, Diane, Lisa, Uncle Ray, the whole town. They knew I wasn't just Eleanor, the quiet woman who brought casseroles and faded into the background. They knew I was Viper, someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side, changed, broken, but alive. I glanced at the box, the metal inside, a symbol of a life I'd tried to forget. It wasn't the first I had others hidden in that metal box in my closet, but it was the first I'd accepted in front of others, the first that made the truth real. I didn't want their awe, their apologies, their sudden respect. I wanted the quiet back, the anonymity I'd built, but it was gone, shattered in this moment, and I didn't know what came next. The ceremony continued, but I was barely there, my mind caught between the past and the present, between Viper and Eleanor. The crowd's eyes lingered, their whispers a soft hum, and I felt it, the shift in how they saw me, the weight of their new understanding. Diane's gaze was heavy, Lisa's stunned, Uncle Ray's uncertain. They didn't know what to do with me now, and neither did I. But as Caldwell's voice carried on, as the sun warmed the grass, I felt something else. Something small but steady, a spark of resolve, a reminder of who I'd been, who I still was. I'd buried Viper, but she'd never left me, and now neither would they. The applause from Caldwell's speech lingered a fading echo as the ceremony pressed forward. I sat the velvet box heavy in my lap, its edges pressing into my palms. The crowd's eyes still darted to me, their whispers a soft current beneath the mayor's closing remarks. I kept my gaze forward, my face composed, but inside, I was reeling, caught in the aftershock of the reveal. Viper. The name hung in the air, a ghost made flesh, and I couldn't escape it. Not now. Not with Diane's stunned stare, Lisa's crumpled program, Uncle Ray's uneasy silence. They knew, and the weight of their knowing was heavier than the metal in my hands. The mayor stepped down and the band struck up a slow rendition of America the Beautiful, the notes swelling over the park. People began to stand, some moving toward the monument to lay flowers, others gathering in small groups, their voices low but urgent. I stayed seated, needing the moment to breathe, to steady myself. The box in my lap felt like a tether to the past, pulling me back to places I'd tried to forget: a desert safe house, a briefing room, a night when my voice had been the only thing standing between life and death. I closed my eyes just for a second and saw it again, the young man's face. His eyes wide with trust, his voice breaking. Viper, don't leave me. I'd made the call and it had cost me everything. A shadow fell over me and I opened my eyes. General Caldwell stood there, his aides a step behind their faces, respectful but distant. The crowd parted around him, their movements slowing, their eyes flickering between us. He didn't smile, but his expression was soft, almost personal, like we were back in that briefing room, just the two of us. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice low, meant only for me. "May I?" I nodded, my throat tight, and he gestured to the empty chair beside me. He sat, his uniform creasing slightly, his hands resting on his knees. The aide stepped back, giving us space, and the crowd's attention shifted, though I still felt their stares. Caldwell didn't speak right away, just looked out at the monument, the stone catching the midday light. "You didn't want this," he said, finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I know that. But it was time." I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the box. "I left that life," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I chose to." He nodded, his eyes still on the monument. "You did, and you had every right. But what you did, who you were, it matters. It always will." He turned to me, his gaze steady. "You saved people, Eleanor. You changed things. You don't get to erase that, even if you want to." My eyes stung and I looked down at the box, the ribbon visible through the open lid, its colors bright against the dark velvet. "I lost people too." I said the words, slipping out before I could stop them. "I made choices I can't forgive myself for." He was silent for a moment, then reached out his hand, resting lightly on my arm. "None of us come back whole," he said. "But you came back. That's more than some." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and he stood, his hand falling away. "Walk with me," he said, not a question, but not a command either. I hesitated, then stood, the box still in my hands, my legs steadier now. The crowd watched as we moved toward the monument, their whispers trailing us like smoke. Caldwell's presence was a shield, his authority keeping the curious at bay, and I was grateful for it. I didn't want their questions, their apologies, their sudden need to know me. At the monument, a small group of veterans had gathered, their uniforms old but proud, their faces weathered. One, a man with a silver star pinned to his chest, stepped forward. His hand extended. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough. "It's an honor." I shook his hand, my grip firm despite the tremor in my fingers, and he saluted, his eyes meeting mine with a respect that felt both foreign and familiar. Others followed, a woman with a cane, her eyes bright with tears, a younger man, his sleeve empty where an arm should have been. His nod sharp and sure. They didn't know my story, not the details, but they knew enough. They saw me, and for the first time in years, I let myself be seen. Caldwell stood beside me, silent, his presence steady as the veteran stepped back. A young girl, maybe 10, approached her mother, hovering behind her, a single rose in her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but clear, and pressed the flower into my hand. I took it, the petals soft, the stem prickly, and nodded, my voice failing me. The girl smiled, then ran back to her mother, and I stood there, the rose heavy, the box heavier, the weight of their gratitude heaviest of all. The crowd began to disperse, some moving to the reception tent, others lingering near the monument. I saw Diane approaching her steps, hesitant, Ethan trailing behind her. Lisa was with them, her face pale, her eyes darting away when I looked at her. Uncle Ray stood a few yards back, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Diane stopped in front of me, her hands twisting together, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. "Eleanor," she said finally, her voice shaky. "Why didn't you tell us I looked at her?" My sister, the one who'd always seen me as less, and felt a pang of something, pity maybe, or just exhaustion. "You never asked," I said, my voice quiet but steady. Her eyes widened and she looked away, her cheeks flushing. Ethan stepped forward, his color guard uniform slightly askew, and hugged me quick and fierce. "That was cool, Aunt Ellie," he said, his grin shy but real. I smiled just a little and ruffled his hair, the rose still in my hand. Lisa cleared her throat, her voice small. "I'm sorry," she said, barely meeting my eyes. "I didn't know. I shouldn't have." She trailed off, her hands fluttering, and I shook my head, not needing her to finish. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't, not really. But I didn't want her apologies, didn't want her guilt. I wanted to be done, to step back into the quiet I'd built. Uncle Ray approached last, his steps heavy, his face tight. "Ellie," he said, his voice gruff. "I didn't mean nothing by what I said. You know that, right?" He looked at me, waiting like he wanted absolution, but I didn't give it. I just nodded, my silence louder than any words. He shifted, uncomfortable, then walked away, his shoulders hunched. Caldwell was still beside me, watching, his presence a reminder of why this had happened. He gestured to the monument where a lone bugler was preparing to play taps. One last thing he said, and I nodded, knowing what he meant. We stood together as the notes began, slow and mournful, the sound cutting through the air like a blade. The crowd fell silent, hands over hearts, heads bowed. I didn't bow mine. I stood straight, the rose in one hand, the box in the other, and let the music wash over me, carrying the weight of every name, every face, every choice I'd made. When it ended, the silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of the breeze. Caldwell turned to me, his hand extended. "Thank you, Viper," he said, his voice low, his eyes steady. I shook his hand, my grip firm, and he saluted, sharp and precise, the gesture sealing the moment. I returned it, my hand steady despite the ache in my chest, and for the first time in years I felt it, the pride, the pain, the truth of who I was. The crowd began to move again, the reception tent filling with chatter and laughter, but I didn't join them. I stepped back, the rose and the box still in my hands, and found my chair, sitting alone as the world moved on. Diane and Lisa hovered nearby, unsure, but I didn't call them over. Ethan waved, his grin bright, and I waved back, my smile small but real. Caldwell and his aides moved to the tent, their work done, and I watched them go, the weight in my chest shifting, not lighter but different. I looked at the rose, its petals soft, and the box, its metal, a symbol of a life I'd tried to leave. They knew now, all of them, and there was no going back. But as I sat there, the sun warm on my face, I realized I didn't want to. I'd been Viper, and I was Eleanor, and both were true. I didn't need their apologies, their awe, their pity. I needed this, the truth laid bare, carried in my spine, in the way I stood, in the way I breathed. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The sun was dipping low as I left the park, the sky streaked with gold and pink, the air cooling against my skin. The velvet box was tucked into my purse, its weight a quiet presence, the rose still in my hand, its petals wilting but soft. The crowd had thinned, most drifting to the reception tent where laughter and clinking glasses carried on the breeze. I didn't join them. I needed the quiet, the space to breathe, to carry the truth that had been laid bare. My steps were slow, deliberate, my navy suit still crisp despite the long day. The town felt different now, or maybe I did, the weight in my chest not gone but shifted like a stone smoothed by years of water. I walked home along Maple Street, the familiar houses passing in a blur, porches with sagging chairs, lawns with kids' bikes, windows glowing as families settled into their evenings. No one stopped me. No one waved, and I was glad. I wasn't ready for their questions, their new way of seeing me. Diane had tried to talk before I left her voice, halting her eyes searching, but I just nodded, promising we'd talk later. Lisa had hovered her apology unfinished, her confidence shattered. Uncle Ray had stayed back, his silence louder than his usual bluster. Ethan had hugged me again, his grin wide, and that was enough, his warmth a small light in the heaviness of the day. At home, I set my purse on the counter, the box inside clinking softly. The rose went into a glass of water, its stem leaning against the rim, a fragile thing that wouldn't last but didn't need to. I kicked off my heels, my feet aching, and stood in the kitchen, the silence of the house wrapping around me. It wasn't oppressive, not tonight. It was familiar, a space I'd carved for myself, a life I'd chosen, even if it hadn't always felt like enough. I moved to the living room, the photo on the mantel catching the last of the daylight. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. The woman in that photo, Viper Eleanor me, was no longer a stranger. She was here in this room, in my bones. I sank onto the couch, my hands empty, my breath steady. The day played back in fragments, Caldwell's voice, Viper. The crowd's stunned silence, the medal's weight, the veterans' salutes, the girls' rose. They knew now, all of them, and there was no undoing it. Part of me wanted to hide, to slip back into the anonymity I'd built, but another part, smaller, stronger, felt something else. Relief, maybe, or resolve. I'd spent years burying my past, letting them think I was just a housewife, a nobody, because it was easier, safer. But it had cost me that silence, that erasure. Today I'd reclaimed it, not because I wanted their awe, but because I needed to remember who I was. I stood restless and moved to the bedroom, opening the closet where the safe waited. The key was still around my neck, a habit I'd never broken, and I spun the dial, the clicks loud in the quiet. The metal box was there, plain and heavy, and I pulled it out, setting it on the bed. I opened it this time, the hinges creaking, and looked at the medals inside, older ones, from missions I couldn't name, from a life I'd left. I didn't touch them, just let them sit there. Their ribbons faded, but bright against the dark lining. The new medal joined them, its box fitting neatly beside the others, and I closed the lid, locking it with a soft snap. I didn't need to wear them, didn't need to show them. They were mine, and that was enough. I moved to the window, looking out at the street, the neighborhood dark, now the stars faint above. A memory came unbidden but gentle, a sunrise over a base years ago, the sky pink and gold, my uniform dusty but my heart steady. I'd stood there alone, promising myself I'd survive, that I'd find a way to live beyond the missions, beyond Viper. I had in my own way, but I'd lost something too. Something I'd found again today. Not pride, not exactly, but truth, the kind that lives in your spine, in the way you carry yourself, in the choices you make when no one's watching. I thought of Diane, her stunned silence, her unanswered questions. She'd call tomorrow, or maybe show up wanting to know more, wanting to rewrite the years she'd dismissed me. I'd listen maybe, but I wouldn't owe her my story. Lisa's apology, Uncle Ray's discomfort, they'd fade, their guilt, their own to carry. Ethan's grin, though, that stayed with me, a reminder that some saw me even before today. And Caldwell, his salute, his quiet. Thank you, Viper, that was a gift, not a burden, a recognition I hadn't known I needed. I turned from the window, my steps soft as I moved to the kitchen. The rose was still there, its petals curling inward, and I touched it just once before turning off the light. I didn't need to keep it, didn't need to preserve it. It had done its work, like the medal, like the ceremony. I moved to the front door, stepping onto the porch, the night air cool against my face. The street was quiet, the town asleep, but I felt awake, alive in a way I hadn't in years. I looked up at the sky, the stars faint but there, and spoke, my voice low. Meant for you, the one listening, the one who stayed with me through this. You don't owe anyone your past. I said my words, steady, my heart full. It lives in your spine, in the way you carry yourself, in the truths you hold when no one else sees. You don't have to shout it, don't have to prove it. It's yours, and that's enough. I stepped back inside, closing the door softly, and moved to the living room, my eyes catching the photo one last time. I didn't need to look at it, didn't need to touch it. I knew who I was. Viper Eleanor, both, and neither a woman who'd walked through fire and come out whole. I turned off the lamp, the room falling dark, and walked to my bedroom, my steps sure, my head high. The box was locked, the metal safe, the rose fading. But I was here changed, yet unchanged, carrying my truth in silence and strength, in the life I'd built from the ashes of the one I'd left. I slipped off the chain around my neck, the key glinting in the moonlight through the window, and set it on the nightstand, a small symbolic act. I didn't need to wear it anymore, didn't need to hide it. The past was mine, not a secret, not a shame, but a part of me woven into my breath, my bones, my being. I lay down the quilt, soft against my skin, and closed my eyes. The weight in my chest, lighter now, not gone, but shared, carried by the truth I'd finally let see the light. And as I drifted toward sleep, the first real sleep in years, I saw it one last time. Not the desert, not the safe house, not the faces I couldn't save, but that sunrise pink and gold, the promise I'd made to myself. I'd kept it in my own way, and that was enough. I was enough.